in this light, perhaps we can briefly mention the BNP. I didn't really want to mention the BNP, but the BNP have had recent success, and everyone will be aware of that fact in electoral terms at the European Union, which has gave them a certain amount of finances, resources, and some would say political credibility. But what I think the one point I want to make is that we must remember, one, yes, obviously they're a racist party, obviously their messages of hate, and obviously their message is incorrect. That doesn't need to be said, really. Perhaps it does. The main thing I want to say is, of course, that they haven't made the running themselves. They sit in a system of imperialism where, as again Steve has mentioned, where whether you vote Labour, Tory, Liberal, Green, all of them are offering you capitalism, 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 and capitalism. And as such, capitalism crisis, having nothing to offer to working people, inevitably has to resort to demagogy when it comes to differentiating between themselves. And so what do they offer? The white working class, who still make up the majority of the country, contrary to popular belief of the BNP, what do they offer them? When they can offer them no jobs, no prospects of increased prosperity and declining, worsening conditions, they say to them, well, you've got no housing because black men have come and taken your housing. You know, you've got no jobs because Asian men have come and taken your jobs. You know, this is the demagogy that is offered not only by the BNP, it's offered in a roundabout and backhanded way also by the establishment political parties who constantly are in a bidding war to say that immigration is the problem. Immigration is not the problem. Overpopulation is not the problem of the third world. What is the problem is capitalism. What is the problem is the problem is one of distribution, not of there being too many. There are plenty of resources in the world. I'll come to that in my speech later on. Coming back to the achievements of the Soviet Union, through the provision of creches, kindergartens, and communal facilities of all kinds, the Soviet Socialist USSR actually laid the basis in deeds as well as in words for the liberation of women. It allowed them to take a full part in the production process, to participate in the running of the country. Here, for the first time, women enjoyed free and equal status with men. Here, for the first time, they were able to educate themselves. It's still today, if I go to I work in a hospital, and if I look at female doctors, they're expected to either have a career or a family. It's the unwritten rule. They will never say it to you openly and directly. They have legislation to say it's not the case. But you will not get on if you go and have your family, if you start working part-time. You know, your job will suffer. It's not even a glass ceiling. People openly speak about it. They ask questions in interviews, you know, but no one has the audacity to challenge them because they know it will mean their career as well. Okay, so still in this country, though we think of ourselves as having women's liberation, the fact of the matter is we don't. And at the times of economic crisis that we're seeing now, increasingly, new research comes out that says actually, you know, kids do much better if women stay at home all the time. Have you noticed? You know, so constantly women are a reserve force of labour who are pushed back into the home when it suits capitalism. Of course, they can be mobilised during the war. During the Second World War, during the First World War, well, women were needed in a munitions factory. Suddenly conditions can change overnight. But when it doesn't suit capitalism, women are still very much in the back seat. And the Soviet Union really blazed the trail for the liberation of women. The USSR, in the true spirit of proletarian internationalism, rendered every possible support to the revolutionary and national liberations movements all over the world. And again today, if you look around the world, it's a changed place. The world cannot be switched back to a colonial era. I'll not speak at length on the topic of the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War. Again, comrades have mentioned it. But it's impossible to mention the great achievements of the Soviet Union without talking a little bit about it. The Soviet Union, when it came out, we saw a beautiful speech of Stalin's. I hope everyone appreciated that. This was the 24th anniversary. This was 1941. This was when the fascist hordes were at the gates of Moscow. This is when everyone was advising Stalin, the Bolsheviks, you should withdraw your government from Moscow into the east of the country. And then, you know, the leadership of the Bolsheviks, the leadership of the Bolshevik party was absolutely firm. They stayed in Russia. They held their celebration, and that speech was from the October Revolution celebration in the 24th anniversary in 1941, under the guns of the German enemy, their audacity, you know, their steadfastness, their courage, the logic of his speech, you know, at a seemingly time when you're faced with a seemingly invincible enemy, to be able to break down the economic reasons, the political reasons, you know, and the emotional and if you like, cultural reasons for the Russians to draw, the Soviet people to draw hope and strength and get the resources to fight the German people. These are tremendous achievements. We know their sacrifices of 27 million people. We know that they took, 95% of the German forces were deployed on the Eastern Front, and we know that it was the Soviets who, following the dire predictions that after the putsch of their army that they would fall, were in fact the ones who turned the tables on the Germans, who chased them back to Berlin, and who raised the red flag over the Reichstag while Hitler was committing suicide. And the disgusting hypocrisy of the remaining imperialists who try and take away our faith in the Soviet Union, take away our faith in socialism by spreading lies and slanders about the Soviet Union and trying to say that the heroism of these people, excuse me, you know, who went to their deaths, you know, with their phrase, you know, for the motherland and for Comrade Stalin, who had such faith in the new future that they built for themselves, who had seen the gains since the October Revolution from 1917 to the beginning of the war. You know, who for that very reason, and Henry Mettelmann, that's an aside, a diversion, Henry Mettelmann, who fought as a panzer officer for the Nazis at the Battle of Stalingrad. And he has a lovely book, Through Hell for Hitler, which is worth reading. Because through the defeat, you know, sometimes you have to hit a fascist to teach a fascist a lesson. And actually through the defeat, through the defeat at Stalingrad, and through the reverses of the war, he learned that fascism was wrong. He learned that the propaganda he'd been taught was wrong. And he learned through actually talking to some of the prisoners that he was guarding before their execution of the tremendous faith that the Soviet fighters and partisans had in the Soviet government, in the victory of the proletariat, and in the inevitability that imperialism fall, and that the Soviet Union would lead the way, and that the working class would know a bright socialist future. And to try and equate, you know, these people, the Soviet Union, the Soviet experience with fascism is nothing short of a fraud perpetrated on working people to try and make us lose faith in the bright socialist future that humanity has if we follow the path of October. It's now 20 years since the lamentable collapse of the once great and glorious Soviet Union and the Eastern European Socialist Republics of 1989, and there's no getting around the fact that it has to be owned up and admitted to. There was a time when the Soviet Union seemed invincible, there was a time of stagnation, and there was a time of when it was overthrown. And if we don't learn the lessons of that time, then we have no way forward to reassert what was good and positive in the experience of the Soviet Union. But it's worth now looking at the capitalist side of the story and asking ourselves that these capitalists and their hangers-on who crow with triumphalism still and then tell us that Soviet Union, that Bolshevism was a failed experiment and that capitalism therefore represents the end of history of humanity, our final destination. It's worth comparing that with the reality of what actually our final destination then actually is. Lenin's description of capitalism, I'll take us back to. He said, over there, in capitalism, there's conflict, war, bloodshed, the sacrifice of millions of lives, and capitalist exploitation. Does it not ring true to you when you look at the world today? Can we believe that humanity will content itself to live like this indefinitely? I think they're deluding themselves, but they cannot delude the masses indefinitely. They can't delude the masses because the reality of the situation constantly reimposes itself. There can be no justifiable reason with our current levels of technology and the huge productive forces that exist in the world today for the want and deprivation that we see all around us. You've heard these statistics before, but I make no apologies for repeating them because, frankly, they're not repeated often enough. Because this is the picture of capitalism, you know, which we're aware of, but we think of somehow as separate from capitalism because we've been trained to do so. You know, 1 billion people in this world, 1/6 of the world population, live on $1 a day or less. Another 2 billion people live on $2 a day or less. That's half the world's population live on less than $2 a day. 1 billion people have inadequate housing in the world. 1 billion people are illiterate. Even in the US, 40 million people have no health care, and we know the problems that Palmer's having trying to do it, even a small patch-up job on that. 13 million children every year die of malnutrition and malnutrition-related diseases. That's 2.5 times the Holocaust against the Jews that was perpetrated in the Second World War by the Nazis. 2.5 Holocausts every year, quietly going on, babies dying in their mother's arms, and there's no memorial to them. There's no statue that's put up in their name. No one kicks up a fuss. It's not a concrete statistic that anyone has ever come to me demanding change about.